The story begins with a man named Bohemi, who had been rotting in prison since 1971. Over the years, Bohemi had completely lost interest in his life because he knew that the rest of it would be spent behind these cold bars. When he was first brought to prison, the early days were extremely harsh for him, but as time passed, he slowly got used to the prison environment and even made a few friends with whom he spent his time talking and playing chess. Most of the guards in the prison were decent people, except for one, a brutal and merciless guard named Wikiski, who often beat prisoners without any reason, simply for his own satisfaction. Inside that prison, there was also a workshop, a place every prisoner dreamed of working in. The reason was simple: for every 2 days of labor there, 3 days were reduced from a prisoner's sentence. It also helped them pass their time more easily. Every evening at 5:00 p.m., the prisoners were sent back to their cells, where they would spend the rest of the evening playing chess and chatting. One day, the warden called Bohemi to his office. The warden told him that the workshop's productivity had dropped drastically, and he needed it to increase so he could receive a bonus. He promised Bohemi that if he could raise the workshop's production within the next 6 months, he would be released from prison the following year. However, Bohemi would need more men to achieve this. The warden agreed and told him he could select any prisoners he wanted for the job. Without hesitation, Bohemi named a very dangerous inmate, Hatchet. The warden immediately refused, saying Hatchet was far too violent to be allowed near others. But Bohemi firmly stated that if Hatchet wasn't included, he wouldn't work either. Reluctantly, the warden agreed and sent guard Wikiski to bring Hatchet out of his cell. There was a separate high-security section in the prison reserved for the most dangerous killers, those who were never allowed to step out of their cells. When Wikiski arrived, Hatchet was revealed to be a towering, terrifying figure, a monster-like man who had committed several brutal murders. Bohemi and Hatchet had become friends months earlier, when Hatchet had once been temporarily released from his cell and had saved Bohemi's life during a prison fight. Since that day, they had developed a strange bond, though Bohemi hadn't seen him outside his cell again, until now. Soon, all the chosen prisoners were loaded onto a bus. Bohemi had picked 6 men for the workshop: Sarshem, Chowdar, Hatchet, Professor Rado, and Groom. Guard Wikiski was also accompanying them, and as usual, he couldn't resist hitting the prisoners for no reason along the way. Eventually, the bus arrived at a steel factory, where all the inmates were made to step out and line up. One of the prisoners started mocking a guard, trying to provoke him, but the guard couldn't retaliate because the prisoners were supposed to work that day, and any violence could delay production. Still, Wikiski called that prisoner forward and warned him coldly that if he tried such behavior again, he would personally break every bone in his hands. The warning was enough to silence everyone, and they were herded into the factory in a single line. Once inside, they chained Hatchet separately, as no one could be sure when his temper might explode. Then Wikiski pulled his junior guard aside and sternly told him that he should not show sympathy to any of these convicts. They were animals, and if they sensed weakness, they would devour him alive. The prisoners were then told to prepare the machines for operation. While doing so, Professor Rado got into an argument with another prisoner named Alien, who wasn't one of Bohemi's original picks. He had been sent by the warden to help with the project. The argument quickly grew heated until Bohemi intervened, telling them to stop fighting and focus on their work instead. But Alien disrespected Bohemi too, talking back arrogantly, until Wikiski entered, his presence enough to make everyone fall silent. At that moment, Wikiski's junior came in carrying a box of chocolates, a treat to celebrate the birth of Wikiski's newborn son. But Wikiski refused to take them. Instead, the junior tried to share the chocolates among the prisoners. Before anyone else could take some, Alien snatched the entire box for himself. Wikiski then called his junior aside once again and coldly warned him not to be friendly with the inmates, saying they were no different from wild beasts. If they realized a guard was soft-hearted, he'd be torn apart in no time. After that, Wikiski turned his attention to the prisoners and noticed that Hatchet still hadn't started his machine. He signaled Bohemi to go and find out why. Bohemi walked over and asked Hatchet what the problem was. Hatchet pointed to the machine and told him to look inside. When Bohemi peered in, he saw a pigeon trapped within the gears. Everyone was puzzled. How could a bird possibly end up inside such a heavy industrial machine? Bohemi tried to free the pigeon with his hands, but instead of escaping, the poor creature became even more tightly stuck. Among the prisoners was one named Gypsy, who had some knowledge of machinery. The Gypsy said that the pigeon could be taken out, but for that, they would need some tools that weren't available there. Just then, the Kiski arrived and, without caring that the pigeon was trapped, ordered them to start the machine. None of the prisoners dared to go against Hatchet, so they all stepped back from the machine. Seeing this, the Kiski ordered his junior to go ahead and start it himself. The junior hesitated, but as he reached for the switch, Hatchet grabbed him by the neck with his chain and threatened everyone that if the machine was turned on, he would rip the guard's head off his body. At that moment, Alien attacked Vikiski with an iron rod, knocking him unconscious. The gypsy quickly ran to block the workshop door so that no one could enter. The prisoners then tied Vikiski up with chains, while the junior guard remained trapped in Hatchet's grasp. When Vikiski regained consciousness, he warned them that the police patrol would arrive any minute now. If they released him and the junior guard immediately, he said, their punishment might be reduced. Hearing this, Bohemi became nervous and said he would go call the police himself. But Hatchet threatened that if Bohemi did that, he'd kill the junior guard right there. Bohemi stopped in his tracks. Vikiski then told them that once they were caught again, they would be sentenced to death for attacking and holding prison officers hostage. Hearing this, the gypsy panicked. He hadn't seen his family in years, and now the thought of dying terrified him. He started arguing with Alien, blaming him and Hatchet for dragging everyone into this mess. Bohemi stepped in, trying to calm everyone down. He assured Vikiski that they would release both guards and go back to work, but only if Vikiski promised to protect them from punishment. Alien disagreed and said it would be better to kill the guards and escape from the prison. Vikiski then said that if they freed him and let the junior go unharmed, he'd decide what to do next. Alien laughed bitterly and told everyone not to trust him, saying that if they released the guards, they'd all be doomed. Now, the professor and the gypsy sided with Bohemi, but Hatchet stayed silent. Bohemi went to talk to Hatchet directly. Hatchet told him that if they freed the pigeon stuck inside the machine, he would return to work and release the junior guard unharmed. Bohemi tried to explain that the pigeon was already dead, but Hatchet refused to believe him. Bohemi made another attempt to open the machine, but it didn't work. Frustrated, Bohemi asked why Hatchet cared so much about one pigeon. Hatchet's voice trembled as he replied that he saw himself in that trapped pigeon, helpless, confined, and desperate to be free. He said he would do anything to set it free. Vikiski suddenly burst into laughter and mocked him, saying that the same Hatchet who was crying over a pigeon had once killed his own brother with his bare hands. Enraged, Hatchet tried to attack Vikiski, but the others pulled on his chains to stop him. Vikiski then accused Bohemi of planning all this from the beginning, claiming that he had purposely chosen Hatchet for the workshop so that they could escape together. But Bohemi denied this, saying he never planned anything like that. He told everyone that when the police arrived, he would talk to them and try to explain the situation peacefully. But if Hatchet killed the junior guard, things would get much worse. The group persuaded Hatchet to loosen the chains around the guard's neck, and they gave the frightened man some water. Just then, they heard noises coming from the door. The police had arrived outside. The situation grew more dangerous by the second. Suddenly, Vikiski shouted to the police, claiming that the prisoners were trying to escape. The police immediately went on alert, and Hatchet threatened Bohemi not to open the gate. Bohemi approached the door, trying to reason with the officers outside. But before he could say anything, Vikiski shouted again, this time telling the police that the prisoners were armed. The officers began trying to force the gate open from the outside. Realizing things were getting out of hand, the professor decided to step outside and talk to the police himself. Out of the two officers present, one ran off to call for backup, while the other stayed behind to guard the entrance, so they couldn't let the prisoners escape. The professor stepped out to talk to the police officer at the gate, but without thinking twice, the officer shot him dead on the spot. The professor fell there, dead. The sight of it shocked Bohemi and the others. Bohemi, in a burst of panic and anger, smashed the gate's lever so it could not be opened from the outside. When the news reached the prison, the warden hurried to the scene and demanded an explanation from the officers. The police said they hadn't yet tried negotiating with the prisoners, but believed the inmates were attempting to escape. The warden rushed to contact the commissioner and ordered that the officers be pulled back, but the commissioner refused to withdraw his men. Inside, the prisoners sat stunned, realizing they were trapped. What could they do now to survive? Despite everything, they brought water to the two bound guards. Bohemi then told the group that the only option was to open the gate. There was no other way out. Still, nobody wanted to risk it after witnessing the professor's death. Bohemi argued that there was only one door. There was no way to escape from this place. For them, surrendering was the most sensible choice. Without waiting for everyone's agreement, Bohemi decided to open the gate himself and said he didn't care if Hatchet killed the junior guard in the process. But as Bohemi moved toward the door, Hatchet began to threaten the guard, forcing Bohemi to stop and listen to him. The warden called a minister and obtained orders to summon the commissioner back, but he was given only 1 hour to resolve the situation. If the warden couldn't regain control within that hour, the commissioner would return in force. Over the prison speakers, the warden announced that the inmates had 10 minutes to surrender. If they did not, he would not guarantee their survival. They now had dangerously little time left. Bohemi promised Hatchet they would free the pigeon from the machine and then surrender. Hatchet agreed, but extracting the bird in under 10 minutes required Hatchet's strength. The machine was massive and extremely hard to move. They asked the junior guard for the key, unlocked Hatchet's chains, and Hatchet set to work trying to pry the machine open. Everyone had decided to surrender, except Alien, who still refused. Alien insisted he would take Vikiski with him and bargain the guard's life for their escape. The argument between Bohemi and Alien escalated. Alien tried to kill Bohemi, but Headset picked him up and threw him aside, saving Bohemi. Then they returned to the machine. Headset put all his might into forcing one heavy layer open, and miraculously it budged. But one more layer remained, and that one looked impossible to open by hand. Through the gap, they could see the pigeon flapping weakly inside. Headset, looking at the bird, told them that he was haunted by a recurring dream, people burying him alive, mocking him as he called for help, leaving him to writhe in pain. For days, the dream had tormented him. In that pigeon, he now saw his own reflection. He could not let it die, so they tried again to pry the next layer open. Bohemi went to the junior guard and implored him for help. At first, the guard refused, but after Bohemi's threats, he had no choice but to assist. Meanwhile, the commissioner reviewed all the prisoners' cases from his seat. The men worked continuously to open the machine, but it was built like a fortress, thick, heavy, and stubborn. With only a sliver of the 10 minutes left, the junior guard, while helping, asked Gypsy about Headset's crime. Gypsy explained that years earlier, Headset had worked at a steel mill. He had saved money for his brother's wedding, invited the whole village, and made elaborate arrangements. But Headset had a terrible drinking problem. His brother used to scold him for making scenes while drunk, and in a furious rage, Headset killed his brother. And when his father tried to stop him, he killed his father too. The next morning, overcome with remorse, Headset surrendered himself to the police. After the 10 minutes passed, the warden tried once more to talk to Bohemi through the gate. Bohemi told him there was a pigeon trapped inside a machine. They could not open the gate without getting it out first. They only needed a little more time. They agreed to surrender quietly afterward. The warden said he needed to speak with Vikiski, but Vikiski lied to him, claiming the prisoners were stalling because they needed more time to escape. Bohemi and Gypsy tried to convince the warden that Vikiski was lying, but the warden wouldn't accept their words. He told them it would be better to open the gate immediately or face punishment. If they opened the gate now, he promised, nobody would be harmed. Bohemi asked a simple, burning question. If surrender was so safe, why had the professor been shot when he went outside merely to talk? The warden tried to reassure them again and warned Bohemi that if he didn't obey, his promise of release next year would be revoked. Hearing that, the others began to suspect Bohemi was being used, that he would be set free while they would pay the price. Alien told Bohemi the warden was lying and would forget him as soon as the work was done. Bohemi had no real alternative, so he decided to free Vikiski to secure the hour the warden had promised. Alien tried to stop him, but Headset released Vikiski anyway, on the condition that if the guards were freed, the warden would give them an extra hour to get the pigeon out of the machine. A short time later, they brought Vikiski outside, but the commissioner ignored the warden's appeal and began firing at the prisoners. Miraculously, the bullet struck Vikiski. Bohemi survived. Furious, the warden struck the commissioner, but it was too late. The hour had passed and the situation fell under the commissioner's control. Bohemi's trust in the warden was broken. The commissioner started summoning soldiers. Despite his wounds, Vikiski was still alive. The prisoners redoubled their efforts to break the machine and free the pigeon. Alien wanted to run away and initially refused to help, but in desperation, he later took a cutting tool and began hacking at the machine. The casing was incredibly thick, and his attempts did little. Slowly, as hope began to fade, the men started telling one another their last wishes. Headset said his wishes were over right now. All that mattered was saving the pigeon. They resolved to destroy the machine. Asking Vikiski about a tool shelf, they learned he actually knew where tools and even weapons were kept. He was deeply hurt that the people he had worked for had opened fire on the prisoners without hesitation. Vikiski told them that if he helped Bohemi, the warden would keep his promise and Bohemi would be released in 6 months. So Vikiski returned the keys. Bohemi brought up Headset's story. After awakening from the terrible events that had haunted him in dreams, Headset had tried to end his own life, but failed. He said that after all the nightmares and memories, he only wanted to feel human again. Hence his desperation to save that pigeon. Bohemi was moved and admitted he had a son he wrote letters to but never had the courage to send. Meanwhile, the commissioner readied the soldiers and explained the plan. Half an hour passed, and the machine remained unbroken. Vikiski told them plainly that if they freed him and cooperated, he would operate the melting tool that could open the machine. Not out of concern for the bird, he said, but because if the prisoners failed to surrender on time, the soldiers would storm in and kill them. With no better option, they freed Vikiski. He fired up the equipment that could melt through the machine's armor. At that point, the soldiers the commissioner had called arrived and stood at the workshop gate, ready to move in. The soldiers had begun planting dynamite near the gate to blow it open and storm inside. After hours of desperate effort, the prisoners finally managed to open the machine, and to everyone's relief, the pigeon inside was still alive. But just as they felt a sense of victory, Vikiski suddenly pulled out his gun and ordered everyone to lie flat on the ground. They all obeyed, except Headset, who refused to move and instead knelt down to give water to the exhausted pigeon. In the next moment, Vikiski aimed his gun and shot the pigeon. Enraged beyond control, Hedjet charged at him despite being hit by bullets himself, and with his last ounce of strength, killed Vikiski. The junior guard was so terrified by the chaos that he couldn't even pull the trigger. Meanwhile, the remaining prisoners gathered around and tried to free the wounded pigeon. Just then, the commissioner detonated the dynamite, blasting the gate apart. Soldiers swarmed inside, guns drawn, and the blast threw Bohemi, Hedjet, and the others to the ground. Somehow, Hedjet managed to stand up again. Holding the pigeon gently in his trembling hands, he released it into the air. The soldiers opened fire at him mercilessly. Bullets tore through his body, but Hedjet smiled faintly as the pigeon flapped its wings and escaped through the shattered window into the open sky. He fell lifeless to the ground, his sacrifice complete. Bohemi slowly stood up beside the fallen Hedjet, joined by the others. Bleeding, battered, and broken, they realized that for the first time in their lives, they had done something truly good, something selfless. They began to smile through the pain, swaying in joy despite everything. The commissioner raised his gun to finish them off, but the young guard stopped him, saying that Hedjet had taken everyone hostage and that the three were not guilty. Thus, the three men were spared from execution. And with the image of the pigeon soaring free into the morning sky, the story comes to a close. If you enjoyed watching it, hit that like button. Let's see if we can reach 500 likes. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. What did you feel during the ending? Did it surprise you? And, of course, subscribe so you don't miss the next gripping story that's coming your way soon. The Cythera